Greetings, foolish mortals. Welcome back to Reading in the Dark. My name is Byron, and I read sometimes in the dark.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel, Reading in the Dark. My name is Byron and I read sometimes. First of all, I hope that your Halloween spooky season is going well for you. I assume nobody's trick-or-treating, and I assume none of us are expecting trick-or-treaters at our homes, but it takes all kinds. So if you're new to my channel and you weren't aware, I call my channel Reading in the Dark because I usually read at nighttime, and I usually read on a Kindle with the lights off and like a candle going. But I also am very much attracted to spooky things, dark things, scary things, and I love horror movies and I love scary books. So I'd like to go through a list of my favorite scary books of all time. And the first group of books that I'm going to talk about are books that actually scared me, which is kind of hard to do. And then the second half is going to be books that they didn't necessarily scare me. They might scare you, but I loved them because they just had the perfect spooky vibe to them. So the first book that I couldn't not mention was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is basically about a study. A doctor gathers some people at a haunted house to basically study their reactions to the house and to see if there's any truth to the rumors that the place is haunted. And it centers around a very shy young woman named Eleanor. This book is a slow burn. It's very character driven, and there are some scenes that happen at night in the house between Eleanor and Theodora where they're hearing noises and things are happening that it just kind of crept up on me, and it creates such an atmosphere and such a mood that it actually did start to get under my skin a little bit, and I had such a good time reading this book. I read this for Spookathon a few years ago, and I haven't reread it since then, but I really, really need to, because I'm telling you, it's the quintessential haunted house story. In fact, Stephen King said something to that effect. He said something like, the greatest haunted house story ever written, or something like that. It's great. If you've seen the Netflix series, also great, way different. The filmmakers actually admitted in interviews too. They were like, this is very loosely based on the novel by Shirley Jackson. The story has nothing to do with what happens in the show at all. Things that it has in common are the house and some of the character names, but even some of the character names are swapped out and given to different characters and stuff. So the stories are just not even remotely similar, but the vibe is there. I really like that show, but just so you know, just because you've seen the show does not mean that you know this book, because they are completely different. The book is so excellent, though, and the relationship between Eleanor and Theodora is fascinating. The way she admires and looks up to but resents Theodora for being more extroverted than she is and more in possession of her sexuality. It's all fascinating. And the first section of the book, which is not scary, which shows us Eleanor's sort of inner thoughts as she drives out to the house, sort of gives you a look at a young woman who's been sheltered for a long time, starting to experience freedom for the first time. And it's so beautiful, and it's so fun to read. And you get a sense as the book carries on, this mounting sense of dread that Eleanor's not totally okay, and we're heading towards something, and it's riveting. The next book on my list is The Red Tree by Caitlin R. Kiernan. Now, this tells the story of an author who decides to spend some time in an allegedly haunted house while she works on a manuscript for a book that she's very, very behind on her deadline for. And she's haunted by memories of a very, very traumatic past relationship of hers. It has a lot of queer rep in it. She's a lesbian. It has vibes and mood and atmosphere for days. There's a creepy basement. She basically finds a half-finished manuscript, part of it still sitting in the typewriter that's in the basement, and then she wants to find the rest of it. It explores and explores and explores, trying to find this manuscript, and then she does, and then she reads it. And as you're reading the book, you read the manuscript too. So you're reading a book within a book. And then in the manuscript that you're reading, there's lengthy quotations from papers and other like studies from other people. So you're reading like a text within a text within a text, and it serves to help the reader get a little bit lost and confused in the same way that the protagonist is getting lost and confused, because she does sort of start to lose it a little bit. And I don't think I've ever read a book that did a better job of taking you on that journey of sort of spiraling into madness like The Red Tree. I loved it. There were moments, sometimes when I'm reading a book and it confuses me and I feel like, wait a minute, what is real and what isn't? That will make the hairs stand up on end on the back of my neck, and that's what this book did, and I love it, and I really need to reread it. I highly, highly recommend this book if you're looking for some creepy vibes and you have patience, because again, most books that I like move kind of slowly. This book is one of them, so keep that in mind, but truly, awesome book. The next book that I have that I'm listing as a book that scared me is not a horror book, not strictly speaking a horror novel. It's actually science fiction. It's also new weird, and I'm speaking of Annihilation by Jeff VanderMeer. Now this is what the film Annihilation starring Natalie Portman is based on, but that film is also based on books 2 and 3 in this trilogy. It sort of condenses all of them together into one film. And again, I really like that movie, but it's very different from the book. It has more in common with the book than The Haunting of Hill House has in common with its source material, but Annihilation is almost impossible to describe. Going into the experience of this story from the mind of the protagonist, who is not named, is the trippiest read of my life. So essentially, this is about an area that suddenly one day was surrounded by kind of like a shimmering force field. They do not call it the Shimmer in the book, though. And there's no way to get in or out without losing your mind, essentially. They send expeditions in, and when the people come back, if they come back, which they normally don't, they are suicidal or they've totally lost their mind. And the descriptions of the many various ways in which the people who have gone in the past lost their minds are absolutely horrifying. The book does such a good job of describing a kind of mysterious weird that is so alien and so strange, and that it's scary. It's not like there's like knife-wielding serial killers running around inside this place. It's that everything is just so tilted and not quite right, and the way it's written and the way it's described is so slightly off that it creates this discomfort so brilliantly. There was one moment in particular that I will not spoil for you that really probably wasn't intended to be scary, but there was a reveal there was a discovery that was made by the protagonist, and it shocked me so completely that I got goosebumps and like my heart skipped a beat. I was so stunned and so shocked that I put the book down, and I was like staring at the words, like making sure I read them right, and like it was as though someone had just sent me a text message that was like really important. Like it was real life, like it affected me. It so completely freaked me out. I don't know that I've ever had an experience like that with any other book. And so although this is primarily science fiction, it is also just so freaky and creepy that I really truly do consider it one of the scariest books I've ever read. So now we're getting into the books that are more traditionally designed to be scary, and I like the vibes of them. I like the atmosphere that they create. They didn't necessarily terrify me. The first one is Hell House by Richard Matheson. I didn't love this book because there were a lot of like misogynist moments and stuff, but it's a haunted house. It has a unique perspective on it in terms of there's a character who brings in a machine to sort of measure or study the spiritual activity in the house. And there's a lot of the Haunting of Hill House type vibes and situations that take place in this book. People are haunted, people are attacked, they have a seance, they do all kinds of creepy things. I mean, it's a major vibe. I recommend this book. I would say that some readers will like both The Haunting of Hill House and Hell House, but prefer one or the other depending on your tastes in how things are written. Hell House was really, really memorable, and if you want a creepy read for Halloween, you probably cannot go wrong with Hell House by Richard Matheson. The next two books on my list are related. The first is Dracul by Dacre Stoker, who is like the great-grand nephew of Bram Stoker, and then the next one is Dracula by Bram Stoker. So Dracul is sort of a prequel to Dracula, but Bram Stoker is the main character in the book. And so it sort of expands upon the idea that the events in Dracula really took place, and tells the story of Bram Stoker's experience with vampirism. And it gets the Dracula vibes so perfect. Dracula is one of my favorite books of all time. I've read it like 3 or 4 times, and it's killing me not to reread it this October, but I can wait until November. So I've read the book several times. I adore the book. I've seen many different interpretations of it on film, and Dracul really captures, for me anyway, the tone and the writing style and the pacing and the energy and the vibe and the mood of Dracula. If you love Dracula, you really kind of have to read this book. Basically, you follow Bram Stoker as he was as like a sickly young child, him and his sister growing up with this woman working in their house who may or may not be alive. And they follow her and they study or try to figure out what's up with her. And I mean, I feel like I don't need to give you too much detail. It is in the world of Dracula. It's a prequel. It was a really fun read. I don't know what I was expecting, but I was so impressed and like pleasantly surprised by how much I loved it when I read it last year. I just can't recommend it enough. I love it. With that said, of course, Dracula is Dracula. Dracula is an epistolary novel, which means that it's a novel told through letters. And they are compiled in such a way that the book is really sort of trying to suggest to the reader that everything they're reading about really happened, and that you're just reading the carefully collected and collated letters that were all written back and forth between these people about these events. I mean, it's really consistently well done. It's epistolary done right, unlike some books that feel like novels that were written and then later broken up into chapters that were given like headings, and then they decided later that it was going to be letters, sort of like The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, which to me was a really great example of a book that claimed to be epistolary but did a half-assed job of it. I think it works really well in Dracula. This novel also has a lot of misogyny in it. It is inherently present. It's a Victorian novel. And so there's something of a metaphor going on here, or an allegory, about the idea of protecting the virtue of young maidens. And so that can get a little annoying, and Van Helsing can be a little heavy-handed, and he likes to monologue and talk about the horror of, how when women are turned into vampires in Dracula, they become really sexually free, shall we say, and it's sort of like a very obvious morality statement, and that gets a little old, but you have to keep in mind that this is a very old book, and if you can get past that, it's worth the trip. I think it's riveting. It's long, but it doesn't feel long to me. There is a section of Dracula written from the perspective of Dracula while he is in his coffin, in the dark, on a ship, listening to the sounds of the ocean and the ship outside of his coffin and figuring out where they are. And somehow it's riveting. Somehow that's not boring. Explain to me how Bram Stoker did that. I don't know. But I remember reading that and thinking, this is so cool. I just think it's the most entertaining book ever. I'm a nerd. I love Dracula. So Dracula. And then the last book on my list, this book also didn't terrify me, but I think it might scare some people. This is The Mephisto Club by Tess Gerritsen. And I have it right here, actually. I need to get this on hardcover. I'm trying to collect all her books in hardcover, but I read all of these books originally in the mass market paperback. I'm going to read the back of this one just because it's been so long since I read it, but I have such fond memories of it. Peccavi. P-E-C-C-A-V-I. The Latin phrase is scrawled in blood at the scene of a young woman's brutal murder. I have sinned. It's a chilling Christmas greeting for Boston medical examiner Maura Isles and Detective Jane Rizzoli, who swiftly linked the victim to the sinister Mephisto Club, a cult of scholars who aim to prove that Satan himself exists among us. Then, with the grisly appearance of another corpse, it's clear that someone or something is indeed prowling the city. Soon, members of the club begin to fear the very subject of their study. Could the maniacal killer be one of their own? Or have they inadvertently summoned an entity from the darkness? Delving deep into the most baffling case of their careers, Maura and Jane embark on a terrifying journey to the very heart of evil. One of the things I loved about this book was that the people who were in this cult, or this club, sort of studying Satan, were not all assumed to be literally evil, and they weren't all just like, oh, well, they're murderers because they're Satan worshippers or something. They're Satanists, so they're evil. Because that's dumb. And I mean, I always enjoy the Rizzoli and Isles books. I love Tess Gerritsen's writing. She used to be a physician, so there's always lots of medical detail in her novels, which make them especially creepy. The other thing I love about the Mephisto Club is that it's one of her novels that takes place during the winter, during Christmas time, and you get a really vivid feeling of the setting of frigid, cold, deep winter in Boston. And it's sort of cozy in a way because there's like a cabin, there's like a lodge or something, and contrasting with the freezing, frigid, cold winter in Boston is like the inside of these beautiful homes and the expensive areas of Boston. And the character that is sort of in charge of the Mephisto Club, that Jane interviews quite a lot, is really, really fascinating. All of the history into all that Satan stuff is really, really fun to read in this book. And the medical examiner makes a friend in this book who may or may not be a priest. And I'm just saying that it's fun to read. So, the Mephisto Club, Tess Gerritsen. I love everything she writes, but this is probably the one that is the most on the nose, spooky. And so it was an obvious pick for me. I had to include her in this. So, those are my favorite scary or spooky, whatever you want to call it, books that I recommend that you might enjoy if you're looking for something spooky to read now that we are approaching Samhain or All Hallows Eve. Now that we're getting closer to Halloween, I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday, has a wonderful Halloween, and stays safe. And, please don't give candy out to people by hand. Just leave it on your porch or something. You're all smart. You know that. I'm not going to be home, so I don't have to worry about it. And my parents' house does not get trick-or-treaters, so there will be no trick-or-treating in my life. And that's okay. Next year. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that if you are looking for some creepy book suggestions for this spooky season, that you found some of the ones that I mentioned interesting. And if you do end up reading some of these books or any of these books that I recommended, please let me know in the comments what you thought of them. The comment box is your friend. And until next time, I will be here in the dark,
reading.